Hey folks, this is Jeremy speaking from the editing booth to kind of give y'all an idea of what's happening here. Justin and Ray sat down with our Iranian comrade Araaz to ask him to expound upon the situation in Iran currently, as well as some context. Unfortunately, because Araz's internet connection was very spotty and because his latency was so high, quite a lot of the audio is unintelligible. We've decided to dub over his part to make sure that y'all can understand what he is saying. I know that's not ideal. It would be preferable if we could just hear him speak himself for himself, but again, the audio quality is quite bad. So this is the path that we have chosen so that the information that he has to share is accessible to people. We have a transcript, which was done by our recording software, which thankfully covers everything he did say. So this will be his words, but it will be more or less covered by my voice. Regardless, we hope that this information is valuable to you, and thank you so much for listening.
Welcome to ProlesPod.
Hello from the past, and welcome to ProlesPod, your bi-weekly dose of history, politics, and culture without the liberalism. You can find and follow us on most social media platforms at ProlesPod and on TikTok at Proles.pod. If you want to help us reach more people, leaving 5-star reviews on any of the various podcast catchers is the best way to do that. If you want to help us with our vision, you can subscribe to our Patreon over at patreon.com/ProlesPod. There's a lot of great stuff there, such as early access to main feed episodes, bonus episodes, theory beats, study guides, raffles, surprise drops, and more, with more on the way. This is a very special additional episode that we felt needed to be released as soon as we could get it out. It was recorded on Saturday, the 21st of June, 2025, at around noon Mountain Standard Time, or 6 p.m. UTC. We interviewed a comrade in Iran as it was actively being bombed by Israel and would be bombed by the US in a matter of hours. Our comrade, Araaz, is living in an area he says will likely be safe from attacks, but there is an internet blackout in Iran, and as a result, the connection for the call was very poor. It is an incredibly informative, interesting, and important episode. It's only about 30 minutes long, but it is packed with insight. Araaz has agreed to come back in the future when the internet is restored to do a longer episode on the historical challenges and victories of socialism and liberation in Iran, and we cannot wait for that. So, without further ado, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us, Araaz.
Okay, I have to say it's my first time being on a podcast, so excuse anything. And also, the internet connection is really volatile, so it could have difficulties in that regard. So, fortunately, I am in a very safe place, unlike many people in Tehran, the capital of Iran. They had to evacuate because of the direct threats of Israel and the Israeli defense minister, and also Trump, who tweeted 3 times that Tehranis should evacuate. Currently, the situation is very interesting and also really one of those weeks that decades happened, as the Lenin quote referred to. There's a hybrid warfare going on against the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I think the Marxist, Leninist, and communists and the general leftist discourse is really muddled and very confused in this regard. Many take the quote unquote anti imperialist position, but it's not really pronounced. It's not really worked out in details, and there are also many, maybe in the minority, people who say, okay, it's a fascist theocracy that should be toppled.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty good place to start, I guess. I was going to say that you probably, if you listen to our podcast with any regularity, you know how we feel about like anti-imperialism. And I don't know about the minority. I would hope not within the communist space. People understand that the number one goal is to resist Western hegemony and everything else is kind of secondary to that. Sure, a socialist Republic of Iran would be great, but not at the expense of the entire region getting destabilized by Israel's and the US behind them terrorist support.
I would say, in regard to the relation between the Islamic Republic of Iran, which was established in 1979 after the Popular Revolution against the Shah, which was really close, I would say, popular in the state of the USA, in the West Asia and Middle East. There's an opposition to Western hegemony by the Islamic Republic, but we should not be mistaken at all, which is real common. The common position held by communists is that the Islamic Republic is in any state anti capitalist. It is fiercely anti communist. And I would also add a detail which is not known also that it's neoliberal and deeply, deeply capitalist, especially since the 1980s. It was a process after the death of Khomeini, the founder, Grand Ayatollah. The US hegemony is the biggest bloc of capitalists, but Iran cannot resist it, actually, since it's not a popular government. That's an observation that communists like me really reached, especially since they got hit really hard this time. Almost the whole high command was created by Israel, the attack force of imperialism. And the regime is repeatedly asking for negotiations while its whole high command is being killed. So I think imperialism can only be resisted with the popular worker government, not Islamic government, the Islamic Republic.
Yeah, and I think we agree in that way, but I guess our worry stuck over here watching is that Israel and the US is going to completely destabilize the area just like they did with Afghanistan, and then instead of any sort of semblance of a coherent government, it's going to end up as, being run by whatever gang is in that specific area. And I guess that's what I'm worried about most.
Yeah, so total social collapse instead of the Korean national economy being in Iran, I think that's a real possibility. I think that's what happened in Libya. And so it's a real possibility that the US and Israel military society at this point is de-civilizational and destroying social cohesion and symbolism of civilization in Iran. I agree that it's a real possibility, but I think communists should not, even in this embryonic form in Iran, which organization wise, we are in Iran. There's no Workers' Party, and the underground parties are minimal. And even in its embryonic form, it should be in neither the NATO effort nor the Islamic Republic, because they will, even right now, they do not allow people to be in a popular manner, to oppose imperialism. They keep everything in control. Even in this wartime and emergency situation, they do not allow any popular anti imperialist feelings. I was saying you are right in that regard that NATO and Israel would basically destroy any form of organized civilization, organized economy. It would turn into another Libya. I think, insofar as that's the correct position, I think the communists shouldn't, when they're not strong enough to maintain a cohesive economy, a cohesive governance, not engage in any revolutionary defeatism. I think the most the communists can do is not to disrupt anything and let the Iranian capitalists fight and defend their governance and territory against the NATO invasion. But I think communists shouldn't fall into the rhetoric of defense of the fatherland because it's not the same situation as, for example, the Japanese invasion of China. It's not a semi colony that is being turned into a colony. It is an independent, although weakened and battered, but independent still, capitalist governance that is being pressured.
I actually have a couple follow up questions. The first would be, obviously, you said that you were not in a formal party. There is some semblance of a party, at least online. I don't know how that translates in the real world as far as like a Communist Party of Iran. But what does the political repression look like for communists, like on the ground in Iran right now?
All right, a very good question because it explains everything. So, the Iranian communist scene, I would say it is a very old one because of our proximity to the Russian Empire. And when the great socialist October Revolution happened, many Iranians who were migrant workers in Baku, which is one of the biggest oil refineries, oil wells in the world back then, a lot of them were inspired and actually, like Stalin in his young activist career, when he was in the Caucasus, he encountered a lot of Iranian workers. So they were inspired, and there were a lot of communists back then. There was a Communist Party of Iran, it was very militant. They tried to do some national liberation in the north of Iran.
Didn't he lead a
A strike in Baku, you mean?
Yeah, he led a strike in Baku.
Yes, but Iranians, because of their immigrant background in Baku, they also were very impoverished and illiterate. There are accounts that they were, despite their very hard conditions, they weren't very receptive at first. But, anyways, so there was a strong background of communists, and there was the Communist Party of Iran, but it was really destroyed by the 1920s by the first Pahlavi king, who was backed by the British. Afterwards, in the 1940s, when the Soviet Union and British Empire invaded Iran, Pahlavi Iran, there was a new party formed called the Tudeh Party. It means the party of the masses. It amassed a large membership, and it was truly a mass party, especially in the 20s and 30s. They led a mass strike in oil refineries in the south, and they had a united trade union all over Iran. But they were also repressed afterwards by the Pahlavis. So we see the pattern here with the Pahlavis and foreign backing. Nowadays, also in the 70s and 80s, there was a new organization called the People's Federal Guerrillas. So these people, they had a peculiar theory. It's interesting because they really hated the Tudeh party because some of their policies, which were questionable, for example, in, as I said, the 40s, they led a strike. Also, they joined governments as ministers because there were symbols of parliamentary democracy. And they didn't use their mass party status to further militant class struggle. So the guerrillas really hated the quote unquote CIC or political. They said, since we're in the periphery in the imperialist world, the class struggle could only be furthered militarily. So they also said we should have a military first. We should have a military cell. Afterwards, it would turn into a vanguard party, something such. It was influenced by Regis Debray, a French theorist of the Foucault theory. They were really inspired by Latin American guerrillas. So anyway, I digress. These organizations, the Tudor Party, the remnants of it from after the 1953 coup, the Fedai guerrillas, and all these parties, they participated in the Popular Revolution in 1979. They were, for the few years of its existence, it was legal and public from 1979 to 1983. They had a lot of members and they operated openly. They weren't against the Islamic government, or at least the Islamic participants of the revolution who were consolidating rule. Afterwards, they were just executed or forced to confess to being spies of the USSR or forced to convert to Islam because they were atheists. So after that, until today, we have a really repressed and I would say a wasteland of political parties. Even the ruling classes, the Islamic rulers, had a party, but they disbanded. There were no parties. It's just class rule, basically. There are underground trade unions and underground parties, but they're not really mass parties. They do not exist. The online symbol, as you said, the online presence of such parties, they do not exist underground in the real world. They are limited to the diaspora, to the handful of circles, or just like issuing declarations or not even doing deep theoretical work, which is a valid point of criticism against them. The Tudeh Party or the CPI, MLM, that's another party. There's a myriad of different sections of the Fede guerrillas abroad. There's also this unlimited amount of like small sectarian parties in the diaspora, and they can only operate outside of Iran. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Yeah. Next, I think I would like to ask, what does education look like for Marxists or communists? Like, how do you learn without risking your life, or do you risk your life by trying to learn?
Okay, so the internet really is a game changer here because back in the day, especially in the 70s, under the Pahlavi government, people had to risk to have access to revolutionary theory. Nowadays, you can easily access that, especially if you know a foreign language, which I was fortunate enough to learn. But also in Persian, in Farsi, the official language of Iran, you can access revolutionary theory. And I think, especially in universities, there's also leftists and Marxist circles. So if you really want to learn Marxism Leninism, you can learn it online in Iran. But if you want to practice, which is an integral part of learning, as we know, as Marxist Leninists, you cannot do that really. Especially, there are no trade unions you can join as a worker that serve as schools for revolution. There are no youth wings of parties. There are basically no organization. There's basically two currents of philosophy or currents of education you could get into as an Iranian, as a normal Iranian person. You would either get the Islamic obscurantist ideology, it's basically class collaborationism, it's Islamic nationalism, also Iranian nationalism, Persian chauvinism. You would get that in school. Or you would get like Western liberal or very sentimental view of the West, basically the Fukuyama, like the end of history kind of stuff you would get.
Okay, so what does the political situation at large look like in real life, like on the ground? Is it like the government has majority support, mass support, little support, liberals are, clamoring to take power, or what is it? What does that look like?
So before the Israeli strikes, it's a little bit different. So since 2016, I would say the maximum pressure campaign of Trump plus the mismanagement of the government by the capitalists and basically the falling rate of profit and all the crisis of capitalism coming together, plus the ecological crisis of Iran, which is like water scarcity and mismanagement of water resources. Iran is a very arid country. All these crises coalesced into huge mass protests with our organization. So it was 2018, 2019, and also recently the women's life freedom protests. Most of these were co opted by, at least in their later stage, they were corrupted by NATO and like a hybrid warfare that they do in Iran. So the liberals, as you mentioned, they really want to at least disrupt governance, utilize the revolutionary situation, unlike us communists who have no organization and no backing and no money. I would say there's a hardcore of government supporters, usually from the declassed, like lumpen proletariats, plus the religious middle petty bourgeois. I would say that's the base of the government. They are very religious, obviously. And I would say that it's like 30% of the Iranian population if you look at it. There's a section of the proletariat that is really, I would say, a majority of the supporters are either petty bourgeoisie, religious proletariat, but overall, I would say they do not enjoy majority support because of all the events which have happened in the last 4 decades. They do not have mass support.
So if Israel and the US, they succeed in toppling the Islamic Revolution government, how do you envision, just obviously a guess, you're never going to know what it's going to look like, but how do you envision the aftermath of that?
So I think it's firstly questionable whether they want to totally topple the government. It could be argued that they want to do what they can to pressure the governance and force concessions on the Islamic Republic. That's a real possibility, right? There's also the possibility that sections of the government, sections of the ruling classes try to, especially after they assassinate the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic, or if they kill him themselves, try to do a metamorphosis of the regime, becoming more something like Jelani in Syria or something. That's also a possibility. So a coup d'etat to change the paradigm of the Iranian bourgeoisie. The third possibility, I would say, is a total collapse becoming Libya. I think that's also a real possibility in national minority areas, especially the Kurds in Iran and Iranian Kurdistan and the Balochis in Balochistan in the southeast and the other side of the country. They could arm them inside national revolts. I cannot really tell which of these scenarios would happen, but none of them are good. And all of them are not in the interests of the Iranian proletariat.
Do you think that there's a large group of diaspora that would come back to participate?
I think a large section of Iranian diaspora as a whole is very reactionary. It's basically Iranian gusanos, right? A section of them are actually connected to the ruling classes right now. Not all of them are like Pahlavi fans. Many of them are related to the noble reach after the revolution. These people are deeply reactionary. They many of them support the current war on Iran. They support their agenda in quote unquote liberating Iranians from the Islamic terrorists. The majority of them coming back, I don't think so. I don't think in Iran it would be a good place after whatever scenario. They wouldn't come back. They're just like shock troopers of hybrid warfare, basically, stamping their protests with approval of the Iranian nation, but they're not really a part of us.
What is the peasant situation in Iran? Is it still a very large percentage of the population?
Okay, a really good question.
A really good question, because Iran, actually, the peasant question, I would say is largely resolved because of the capitalist change of relations in Iran already in the 70s, because of the white revolution, quote unquote revolution, which was instigated by the Pahlavi government. So they largely urbanized the population. Iran has a large proletariat. Iran is also a very industrial country, although the industrial capitalists are under increasingly a lot of pressure. It's not really profitable in Iran to do industry anymore, especially since the 90s. After some reforms, IMF reforms that Iran did, Iran is a very speculative economy. As of now, the major industries are oil, petrochemicals, and mining, basically. The banking sector is, there are many private banks in Iran that just do speculation on real estate. And for any capitalist, it's much more profitable to speculate on currencies and gold rather than to do any production. That's also a reason I mentioned earlier that this current regime cannot effectively resist imperialism.
Because it's holding hands with imperialism.
Exactly. Large sections of the Iranian bourgeoisie, despite the rhetoric of anti-imperialism, has furthered IMF reforms, or privatized large sections of the industries which were industrialized after the revolution. Iran had a very progressive labor law after the revolution because of the leftist participation, but they added a lot of new laws and destroyed the old labor law. So most Iranian workers do not have a permanent contract anymore. So it's basically America, but much poorer in terms of neoliberalism.
Basically, America, but much poorer in terms of neoliberalism.
Why do you think people haven't toppled the government already if it only has, 30% support?
They couldn't topple the government.
They couldn't topple the government. So the people is a very vague word. I think we need class analysis. I have prepared a little text of class analysis of Iran, and large sections of the population are under pressure because of the sanctions, plus the already capitalist crisis in employment and hyperinflation and so on. So large sections are disgruntled and they do not support the current policies, but due to the petty bourgeois dominance, especially in ideological terms, they could not organize. Especially considering the last protests that I mentioned, like in 2018, 2019, and also recently, Women of Freedom protests. because of the murder of Masa Jina Amini, they didn't organize. They cannot. The petty bourgeois do not have an independent revolutionary potential. They just disrupt and act as pressure valves. That pressure leverage of the Western bloc of imperialists on the Iranian capitalists. So, shortly, I would say it's because the proletariat is not organized by the vanguard party, and therefore the next revolution, if it's going to be effective, if it's going to do anything, achieve anything, it's going to have to be socialist revolution led by the vanguard of the working classes.
And what do you think is necessary to pave the way for that?
I think, firstly, most importantly, we need to understand where we are, who our friends are, who our enemies are. I think neither of the imperialists. Many Iranians do not know what is imperialism, and that's a shame because many knew in the popular revolution in 1979. The government which was established after the revolution did not do anything to educate the people on imperialism. That's one side of the issue. The other side is a complete lack of class consciousness. So, most importantly, we need a revolutionary theory to have any revolutionary action, and we need to educate young people from workers' families. We need to educate communist categories in Marxism Leninism. Need to especially use online resources. We need circles of study of Marxism Leninism afterwards. We need to try to connect with the advanced sections of the working class. There were many spontaneous uprisings of trade union activity, especially after the sugarcane complex. That's like a really glaring example because the workers, by their own efforts, they just put forward such demands that are unbelievable because there was no intellectual influence on them. They demanded worker control of the facility. It was the biggest sugarcane processing plant in the Middle East. And due to the neoliberal policies and capitalist policies of the government, they were destroying production, didn't pay the wages of the workers, and the workers grew increasingly militant. And this is like in 2018. Yeah, they put forward slogans that are very revolutionary. I think connecting with these people as students, intellectuals, and having a clear mind, creating discourse, and understanding the next steps, that's the most important actions we could take right now.
Do you think that given the degree of political repression for socialists in Iran, that it would be more beneficial to have like a Lenin type organizer outside of Iran to basically like form groups, reading groups or whatever to educate? Or do you think that it should be more underground, spontaneous movement?
Regarding this question, I would say it depends on the situation. There could be a lot of things to be done outside of the country, abroad, like Lenin and his comrades in Switzerland were doing, also many other places, but it shouldn't be limited to the diaspora abroad. But that also plays a role. I don't think it's really like cut off. You could be in either of those locations and still play a revolutionary role. You should use your resources and situation and utilize them. So I would say maybe it's both. It's all hands on deck at this point.
Given the kind of rich history of communist movements in the region, although obviously they all met a very bitter end, are there a lot of like important works that are in Farsi?
Yes, there are like original works.
Yes. So there are original works. As I mentioned, there was some unique, at least to my knowledge, unique theory works, especially the People's Fide guerrillas. Although I do not agree with them, they thought there would be like armed vanguard of intellectuals who would try to break the military hegemony of the ruling classes and then connect to the working class, not the other way around, like connecting with the working class and then breaking their dominance. So I would recommend reading, I forgot his name, he was an Iranian Armenian. He was a left communist. He was also one of the founders of the Iranian Communist Party. He was later pushed into the USSR. That's an interesting Iranian theorist.
Well, I mean, like even just like Lenin or Marx or Stalin or whatever.
Yes, most communist works
Most communist works, I would say almost all, are translated into Persian and other languages in Iran that are spoken.
Kind of to pivot back to current events, do you think that the strikes on Iran will stay in the north? Is that like where the majority of the nuke areas are, or do you think it's going to spread to the greater region?
I think the war will escalate.
So I think the war will escalate. I think it will quickly involve America. Iran will also, if it reaches that point, Iran will also strike at oil facilities, at oil infrastructure in the Gulf. And then afterwards, there will be a surge in oil prices. It could take from 3 months to years, like 2 years. That's a real possibility. So I think it's a really important historical event, and it's a point of militarization and fascization overall. I think it will radicalize a lot of people.
Yeah, those kind of events have that effect, which is terrible and necessary at the same time.
It would be useful to mention the
I think it would be useful to mention the collective statement of independent Iranian organizations, independent labor organizations. I've sent a link to their statement. They have pointed out how the warmonger agenda is really detrimental to the working classes of both countries. So I think that's a really useful, insightful. I think it shows what their positions are.
This is the joint statement by independent organizations in Iran opposing war and warmongering policies, translated from Farsi. In light of the current unstable and dangerous conditions in Iran and the region, the undersigned organizations consider it their duty to adopt a collective position. The working people of Iran, workers, teachers, nurses, retirees, and other wage earners, have never had and will never have any interest in war, militarization, the bombing of the country, or in oppressive and exploitative policies. The Israeli military attacks and the bombing of hundreds of targets across different parts of Iran, including infrastructure, workplaces, refineries, and residential areas, are part of a warmongering project whose cost is paid with the lives, livelihoods, and futures of ordinary people, especially the working class. Israel's claim that it holds no hostility towards the people of Iran is nothing but a lie and a political propaganda. Just yesterday, the Israeli Minister of Defense threatened to, quote, burn Tehran, end quote. Repeated threats by Trump and other U.S. officials, along with the full support of Western governments for such actions, have only further fueled tension, insecurity, and destruction in the region. The governments of Israel and the United States are the main perpetrators of the ongoing genocide in Gaza and numerous other crimes in the region and across the world. The United Nations and international institutions that hypocritically posture as peace-seeking while remaining silent in the face of these atrocities are part of the same system of domination. The entirety of the global capitalist system, its profit-driven logic, and imperialist powers are the main causes of wars, human catastrophes, and environmental destruction. The working class of Iran not only has no benefit from war, but these wars have directly targeted its life and security. The continuation of economic sanctions, the allocation of massive budgets to military affairs, and the restriction of freedoms will lead to greater poverty, wider repression, hunger, death, and the displacement of millions. We, the independent workers and grassroots organizations and activists in Iran, have no illusions that the United States and Israel want to bring us freedom, equality, and justice, just as we have no illusions about the repressive, interventionist, and anti-worker nature and conduct of the Islamic Republic. We, the workers and toilers of Iran, have for many years paid heavy costs, including imprisonment, torture, execution, dismissal, threats, and beatings in our struggle to secure even the most basic rights and necessities of life. We remain deprived of the right to organize, assemble, and freedom of expression. The workers and working people of this country are rightfully furious and fed up with the Islamic Republic and the capitalists who, over the past 4 decades, have amassed astronomical wealth on our backs while condemning us to perpetual insecurity and deprivation. All officials and institutions involved in the repression and killing of workers, women, youth, and the oppressed people of Iran must be prosecuted and held accountable by the oppressed people themselves. Our struggle as workers is a social and class-based struggle. This struggle will advance only by relying on our own strength in continuity with the movements of recent years, including bread work freedom and women life freedom, and through solidarity with the international working class and all humanist, freedom-seeking, and equality-oriented forces. The continuation of the current war can bring nothing but greater destruction, irreversible environmental damage, and the repetition of human disasters. The working class and the impoverished people of Iran, like the oppressed of other countries in the region, are among the main victims of this situation. The undersigned organizations call upon all labor organizations, human rights institutions, anti-war groups, environmental activists, and peace-seeking forces around the world to unite in demanding the immediate cessation of war, bombings, the killing of innocent people, and the destruction of the environment, and to support the struggles of the people of Iran and the region to put an end to genocide, militarism, and repression. The people of the Middle East urgently need an end to the devastating tensions between regional and global powers, and the establishment of a just and lasting peace, a peace under which people can determine their own destiny through organizing, mass organizations, expanding protests, and direct and collective participation. No to war, no to warmongering policies. An immediate ceasefire is our urgent demand. Signatories: Syndicate of Workers of Tehran and Suburbs Bus Company, Syndicate of Workers of Haftepe Sugarcane Company, Retired Workers of Khuzestan, Retirees Alliance, Coordinating Committee to help form workers' organizations, Retirees Unity Group. This statement was written on June 19th, 2025.
I think I mentioned the economy. The economy, as I said, is really riddled with crises. There was hyperinflation of 50%, which it's a lot. Westerners have not experienced anything like that, at least not since the 70s, I would say. Perhaps in 2008, I don't know. There's hyperinflation. There's also high unemployment of 40%, 46%, especially of the youth. They've also pushed for commodification of education. There are private universities everywhere. And many of my friends also, despite being very good students, they had to go to private universities because there was no place for them in public universities. And they have to pay at least twice the monthly wage of a worker. And, the effects of the war they're not set yet. Many people are not working right now. And I think in the coming months, the Iranian economy will deteriorate even further. So, long story short, the Iranian economy is riddled with great crises, hyperinflation, great sanctions, and high unemployment, and also stagnation. And the face of the war has not yet been felt. It will decisively worsen the situation and sharpen class contradictions. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you once again, Araaz, and thank you all so much for listening.
And it was really a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. Congrats.
We hope you got as much out of it as we did, and we hope it inspires you. Please pop over to Patreon and subscribe if you haven't already at patreon.com/ProlesPod. It helps us immensely, and as things become increasingly precarious, it will become even more important to us and the movement at large. Stay tuned for some changes coming there as well in the near future. We'll see you in a little less than 2 weeks. Death to America, death to the Zionist entity, and solidarity with the working people of the world, forever.
They envision the entire world Sovietized communist style. Communist style. Communist style. Communist style. Communist style.
Stalin.
Soviet retro. Communist style.
retro.